Well, we're at 12:02. In the sake of time, I think we should get started. Thank you everyone for joining us here today to talk about stormwater. And thank you especially to SPC and Aaron Keppel-Adams for extending the invitation. You know, we're here to talk mainly today about MS4 projects and community co-benefits. My name is Tom Petroni. I'm actually the AKRF office lead for AKRF, and 15 years experience now in the Pittsburgh water resources region, doing all kinds of water resources projects, mainly stormwater. But yeah, I think this is just a very, very timely project, a topic, to be honest. Given the current financial uncertainty that we're all facing, this now more than ever, in my opinion, is something that communities are going to be stressing, especially when it comes to grants or when it comes to federal and state aid. How do we take these investments, these MS4 projects that we're all required to do now, right? We all have our PRPs. How do we maximize our returns on these investments? And I think this is something as we move along here, especially given our current situation financially and everything that we're facing across the world, and even in the United States, especially, is how do we make this happen more often? How do we look through a multi-objective lens rather than maybe just a singular lens of water quality? And I think drilling down into this issue is going to be more and more important. I'm joined today. I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'd like to also introduce two other folks from AKRF, Shandor Soleil and Kevin Flynn. And Shandor, if you want to just take a second also to introduce yourselves. Yeah.
Hi, folks. Nice to be with everyone today. I'm Shandor Soleil. I'm the Director of Water Resources for AKRF, based in Philadelphia. I've been doing this type of work in one way or another for a lot of years in Pennsylvania. I started around the year 2000, beginning of the millennium. I figured, hey, let's get into stormwater management for the new millennium. But a lot of stream restoration projects in Pennsylvania over the last 20 years. I'll be talking about a couple of them today, and just how we really, like Tom said, go about implementing community-based projects that have multiple benefits, and looking forward to sharing more as we get into the presentation.
Kevin, you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Kevin Flynn, I'm a senior engineer with the firm, and excited to share everyone some more experience in MS4 and stormwater projects.
Great. Yeah, so can everyone see my screen? That's like the mandatory Zoom call question, right?
Did you share a screen, Tom?
That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make sure that, can you not see? No?
I don't see it, but do other folks see it? Maybe you could just...
Let's see.
Just blur
Try again here.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
That's coming now? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Great. Oh, man. This Google Chrome is in the way. All these little buttons are getting in the way of my...
I can't. Oh, there I can see
yeah.
it. Yep.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, let's start the presentation. Again, thank you to the SPC, Aaron Keppel-Adams, Claire Jordy. I think a lot of what they're trying to do around this is they're a great resource. By the way, I don't know if you checked out their newest website and their revamp, but it's just got a wealth of information on it. Grants, everything you want to know about stormwater, Aaron and Claire have it covered. So thanks to them for inviting us. So why multi-objective planning? We're going to talk about that. We're also going to just talk briefly about MS4 pollutant crediting and why it's also an important piece of this puzzle, obviously critical. And then, like Shandor said, we're going to do some project case studies and hopefully have some time for Q&A. So, these MS4 projects, the goal is to improve water quality, right, and of our impaired streams. And the bottom line when we're developing these reduction plans. It's right in the title, pollutant reduction plan. So we want to improve the water quality of our parish streams, but how do we also consider these other two aspects of this when we're doing this? These ecological co-benefits and these community co-benefits, and I break them down in these bubbles, and I think you'll see why as we move along with the presentation. But when you talk ecological, you're talking increased vegetation, improved habitat, biodiversity, floodplain restoration. Today's flooding with our increased storms, this is huge. Restore pre-development hydrology is basically the goal a lot of times. Other than including the water quality, it's how do we mimic our pre-development landscape, and that groundwater recharge, reduce stream and temperature, stream power, and erosive banks. And again, that flooding is that a lot of communities are really is a focus we're seeing everywhere. And then you go into these community side. You have this ecological, then you have the community angle and the human aspect of these projects. How can we take these MS4 projects and maybe reduce a burden on existing infrastructure, and again, the flood reduction issue? How do we maybe consider the health of our communities and the social well-being? And this is tied to recreational opportunities. Reduce stress. And how do we create these community gathering places potentially? And safety. When we're doing these projects, is there a safety aspect? Maybe we can consider and improve that, or at least make a dent in that safety issue that might be there. And neighborhood, community, and park space and beautification. We have parks that are a lot of times in need of repair. Is there a way we could piggyback on that need for that repair and include an MS4 project or pollutant reduction as part of that? So it's a lot of cross collaboration too between departments. And whether it's the parks department and your water department, or your roads department and your water, having that collaboration is key as well. And there's also air quality and reduced heat island, which are more ancillary effects, but shown to be not only a problem, but especially with climate change, the heat island. The more impervious that we're seeing, the less we can reduce that and reduce our impervious and create more green spaces and shade for our communities. It's likely that's the elderly especially that are susceptible to that. So when we talk multi-objective planning and co-benefits, I really like this graph. Shandor sent this to me and I said, wow, I'm going to let's walk some people through this. But on the x-axis here, you have your MS4 project investment, right? And you want to look at this in a life cycle cost, and we'll talk more about life cycle costs as we go through our presentation. But for every single MS4 investment, there's potential co-benefits realized for that investment, right? So whether it's a $100,000 project or a $500,000 project, there are some co-benefits that can be attached to that project, and there's a potential range of those benefits that you can get for that investment. And based upon those potential scenarios and alternatives, there's only a maximum you can do. And the key is really finding which of those benefits fit best within the context of the project and the community. So you want to be able to find in that previous slide, which of those check boxes can we most check off, right? And which of those can maximize our return? And really what this comes down to, and this might sound simple, it requires planning for these projects through a multi-objective lens. Rather than just looking maybe at the water quality, let's look at this through a different perspective. And let's see, of all those things in that previous slide, are there ways that we can check off, which of those boxes can we check off the most? And this is the Pareto, Vitale Pareto, the Italian economist from the 1800s, came up with this. And he also is famous for the 80-20 principle. So this is a long-standing economic study that has long been proven to be an approach. And I think if he were around today, he would be nodding in agreement with me, hopefully. But anyway. Moving on to today's challenges, I mean, you look at the Water Environment Federation released a national survey 2 years ago on this issue, and without question, this is a stormwater is a multifaceted challenge. It's not just meeting federal and state water quality, which is the regulation. We're forced to do that. But if you were to ask these communities all their challenges, there's many. There's a lot of them that go into this, and that's why we're here today. Is and if you look at two of the top ones that I highlighted here, is funding is always the number one concern, right? And it's not. We let off that today with our current COVID situation, But in my mind, funding and lack of public support go hand in hand. They really, without the public support, you're not going to get. So these are two issues that, to my mind, are interlinked. And how we can bridge that gap, in my mind, how we can bring that together, is including more of these co-benefits. And the more we can do these co-benefits, the more we can get that public support up, and the more we can likely get the project funded. And the more people can buy in, right, the more likely I think that we'll be able to tackle this problem in the future. And just nationwide, this is a huge problem, this lack of funding. There's $7.5 billion gap, and that's just MS4. That doesn't include CSO, and that doesn't include a lot of the other water quality flooding problems, obviously, which flooding is in the trillions. But hey, if you do all these, you can potentially take dents off each of those. So back to this survey again. Again, it's EPA reports that about 1,600 of the 7,500 MS4 communities in the nation do not even have a fee. So we need to continue, and I think this co-benefits perspective lends itself to the public message that, hey, your tax or your investment in the stormwater is multifaceted, and not only does it bring benefits to addressing water quality, but it also benefits your community. And the more we can drive that message home, the more we can be successful in implementing these projects. And I think the watershed-based stormwater planning speaks of a co-benefit kind of philosophy, where you're not just looking at maybe a single project in a watershed, or you're focusing on one. You're looking at it from a multi-perspective lens, and that's what it's really all about. And America's Water Infrastructure Act, I don't know how much people know this, but this was in 2018, right around when the WEF survey was being done, and they started a task force, and they wanted a roadmap. They wanted to figure out why can we not get the public's funds to get this problem addressed. And it was just released this year, and it's a great report. I highly recommend. I should put the link in there. I could send the link out to everyone afterwards, actually, but it really drills down into this issue of, first off, we need funding, we need increased grants, we need to make sure funds are dedicated solely towards stormwater. But a big piece of this report is the increased public education and awareness of the multiple benefits of stormwater investment. It's said over and over here, really. And the one quote I'll pull out of that report is the educational goals that should demonstrate that stormwater management investment directly benefits the health, safety, economic opportunity for citizens and residents through the overall improvement of water quality and resiliency of communities. Now, I might have edited that sentence down a little bit, but it's speaking to exactly what we're saying here today. And this is another figure pulled right out of that report. And again, I think it's just a nice figure that speaks to, and that this language is right out of the report too, is this stormwater management is undergoing a significant paradigm shift. And local programs have to often consider multiple responsibilities and objectives and when considering these projects. And you can see them all there. You can see them all on the graph. I think everyone here, being stormwater planners and stormwater thought leaders on this call, get these. But I think we need to, when we're out in our communities and talking about this issue, I think we need to be stressing these more and saying them more often. So again, in summary, why multi-objective framework? Why this multi-objective? We're living in this new era of financial uncertainty and budgets, really. And the more we can do this, the better we're going to be in getting investment in this important issue. So, it demonstrates to the public that, maybe a lot of the public with the single lens pollutant loading especially, in Chesapeake Bay, they might be saying, oh, we're doing it, but that other community over there isn't doing it. And, it gets into, well, but the more you consider these multi-benefits like reduced flooding, increased public safety, infrastructure upgrades, and you include that message as part of the overall public outreach, I think it's critical. I really do. And alternative funding mechanisms such as grants and loans, I said this earlier, I think you're going to see easier access to these the more you can do this. We're seeing this with the FEMA BRIC program that's coming out this year. Also, the state revolving funds. All of these things are showing the more you can include these as your grants applications, the better you're going to be in position to receive that grant, and you're going to be even better positioned to beat someone else to that grant, right? So, and just stressing again, the full life cycle cost evaluation is critical component to this. Looking at just through the lens of how much it's going to cost to build, and not looking at through, hey, what are the benefits throughout the whole life cycle of the project, especially when it comes to flooding and flood risk reduction. That's a life cycle cost analysis that should be done for flood reduction, because your risk is annual, right? So you have an annual risk that cost will throughout the life cycle of that project, that cost will increase as you go longer in that project. So quantifying those benefits beyond just capital costs, to me, is important. So let's talk about pollutant crediting. For those who've done the PRP plan, pollutant reduction plans for your MS4 communities, you have a toolkit to work with, right? You have these are the common qualifying BMP types. You have stream restoration. You have these buffers or stream offset regional buffers, and you have stormwater BMPs and green infrastructure. You also have non-structural BMPs, whether it's your street sweeping program and things like that. But today we're really going to focus on the stream restoration component. And if you were to look at a lot of PRPs across the state, there's a heavy stream restoration component, because that's generally your biggest bang for your buck with reducing sediment and nutrients, which a lot of our streams are facing. So today we're going to focus on stream restoration, but we really could talk about each of these. Honestly, we can give it our own presentation on each of these. But just to bring this all together with AKRF's approach, what we do is, what we'd like to do with these projects is we like to find, obviously we want them to be cost effective first and foremost, and that first starts off with a desktop analysis and also in field assessments. And sometimes that'll include like measurements like we're doing here to the right, where we're actually measuring bank erodibility using flow tests. And once we have that data, that initial data gathering done, we work with the community to align what we found with other capital investments, right? And find out where we can maximize our co-benefits potentially with what we found. And that includes parks improvements, whether it's streetscapes and paving programs, stream bank restoration, again, which is going to be the focus of our project, and floodplain and wetland restoration. So, we have experience in all these in getting those done. And I think I'm going to pass now the presentation to Shandor, who's going to talk a little bit more about crediting and some of the case studies. But I think generally, I hope I framed the issue well enough for why we want to think about this approach more often when considering our MS4 projects. And I think some of these case studies that Shandor and Kevin are going to talk about are really going to drive the point home. So I will drive, Shandor, and okay. Just let me know when you want me to advance. Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to go try to go quickly. A lot of folks are probably familiar with these requirements, but I'll think for those of you who aren't familiar, it's worth a review. We'll go a little bit in the weeds on these DEP requirements for stream restoration. But we are focusing on stream restoration primarily because it's really the dominant approach from a crediting standpoint. And then we can layer in, a lot of additional benefits into these programs. But here's what you need to know about crediting. Most of the requirements, PADP is a defined set of criteria for generating credit for stream restoration projects. And most of the requirements relate back to what's called the expert panel report, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, or many of you are familiar with, which is a report developed by the Chesapeake Stormwater Network back in 2014. The reference is here below. You can look it up online, download it, read it, treasure it. It's really the best resource there is out there for crediting. In addition to the report in 2020, early 2020, right before the pandemic, they were able to squeak out recommendations that clarify how to apply the expert panel reports to restoration projects. So that's kind of the report is essentially the law of the land in terms of Pennsylvania is gonna recognize credit using stream restoration projects. And so the first thing that I always point out about the crediting methods is that you can either use, it's up to you whether you want to use the expert panel protocols to determine pollutant reduction, or you can use what's called a default rate. And the default rate actually depends on how you determine, there's two default rates, and what default rate applies is actually going to depend on how you determine your existing PRP loads and your existing pollutant loads, and your PRP. And so the first default rate is 44.88 pounds per foot of stream channel. That's foot of stream channel, not foot of bank, which is a commonly, that's a 200% error if you're thinking that's per foot of bank. So make sure that you're looking at that as foot of channel. And this would apply only if you're using a simple method as a calculation method to calculate your existing loads. And so the second default rate, which is much higher at 115 pounds per linear foot, and this is, I should say, this is set for sediment, or sediment only. That's considerably higher, and you would be able to use that rate if you use a watershed model such as MapShed or AV, WGLF, or EPA SWIM to calculate your load. So it really depends on what approach that you're using coming in. And if you're using a watershed modeling approach in particular, DEP also allows you to deviate from the default rate and use one of these four specific expert panel protocols to determine your sediment and nutrient load reduction. So the first protocol is P1, Protocol 1. It's by far the most sort of lucrative and commonly used protocol for stream restoration, and that deals primarily with the sediment that you prevent from eroding from stream banks when you implement a restoration project. Protocol 2 deals primarily with nitrogen removal through biological processes in stream and riparian zones. Protocol 3 provides some layered on credits for stream restoration projects when you're excavating a new floodplain, with the idea that sediment and nutrients are stored within floodplains. So if you're creating a floodplain, that's sort of credit worthy. And then Protocol 4 is for what we call dry channel regenerative stormwater conveyance. Regenerative stormwater conveyance projects that are in the dry, that are essentially in ephemeral or intermittent channels, and are treated more like stormwater BMPs that are stream restoration projects. And finally, I should note that these four protocols are additive. So if you're generating, you can generate, if you design, the perfect project, and you can generate sediment or nutrient reductions with all four protocols, you can sort of add those up. So next slide, Tom. Okay. So in addition to the expert panel protocols, and there's a lot more to the expert panel reports, and obviously everybody should review those in great detail. But DEP did come out with a memo back in May of 2018 that provided some additional considerations that would layer on to the expert panel protocols in terms of how to permit or how to earn credit for stream restoration projects. And really, if you boil these down, there's a number of specific requirements where you can see on the slide. But it's really that they want these projects to be integrative projects. It's really, I think, speaks to what Tom was talking about. Holistic approaches that emphasize floodplain reconnection and reconstruction in particular. Not really crediting armoring projects if you're thinking that you're going to go in and use riprap or gabions or something like that to generate credit. That's kind of a no-no, and that's echoed in the 2020 expert panel recommendation supplement as well. A 35-foot minimum buffer, so that we need to have a nice riparian zone on both sides of the stream. No dinking and dunking with small projects, so you need at least 100 foot of project length. Trying to treat the upstream impervious, I'll mention that in one of our case studies, and then making sure that you're going on both sides of the channel where feasible. It's not always feasible. There may be land ownership issues, but in particular, but when that's possible. So that gives you a little bit of a look at how DEP is looking at crediting from a stream restoration standpoint. And this stuff is important. It is a big driver. So next slide, Tom. Did someone have a question? I sensed anybody? No? Okay. So just to drill down a little bit into Protocol 1, I won't get too in the weeds on the expert panel reports, but wanted to drill down a little bit on Protocol 1 since it's such a critical protocol for prevented sediment for stream restoration projects. And there's really, when you look at Protocol 1 in detail, there's really three primary components that you're going to use. You're going to estimate a bank erosion rate based on what's called a BHI rating, which is a bank erodibility assessment, married with a near bank shear stress assessment, which is sort of like the shear stress applied in the bank near the erosion site. That's going to be your bank erosion rate, the height of your bank, the bulk density, which is how dense the material is, so converting essentially from volume to weight. And that's going to give you kind of this gross bank erosion in pounds per year. And then you're going to apply two ratios to this gross bank erosion. One is called the sediment delivery ratio, and that really accounts for the fact that basically all of that sediment that you're preventing from eroding is not going to turn into a sediment reduction in the Chesapeake Bay itself. There's a ratio of sediment produced at a site to what's delivered to the bay. There's a lot of storage and so forth in floodplains and in-channel storage along the way. And those sediment delivery ratios are defined for each watershed in the CAS 6 model. You can look those up online. We might be able to send out that link as a supplement. But the credit efficiency is the second one, and the basically the expert panel docks your gross credits by about 50%, or 50% specifically, for just general uncertainty related to crediting, long-term performance. But there have sort of a new wrinkle in this is that we have now credit verification protocols that have been released by the Chesapeake Stormwater Network that really look at going up to 100% with 3 years of cross-section monitoring and other verification. So you can actually get that back up to 100%. But applying those two ratios will really yield the prevented sediment credit in pounds per year. And that's really the primary metric that we're looking at in terms of getting value out of these projects from an MS4 compliance standpoint. So that's a little bit of a drill down into the crediting. I think it's important, but we also want to talk about how to house that, to not get too hung up on the crediting, but to build projects that are holistic and really have other benefits. So we'll talk more about that in the case studies. But I guess I wanted to just pause here very briefly for any questions thus far. Okay. All right. And please feel free to chat those questions out too as we go along. We can address them. But I want to get into the case studies. It's always great to be able to talk about projects. This is a project that we did in Philadelphia a few years back. I'm actually not going to talk about that project, but it's a large regional stormwater wetland. Tom, you're a little quick on the trigger finger there. But it's that again. That's we've got gazebos and walking trails and all kinds of great stuff for the community in this project, and so we'll talk more about these types of projects as we go forward here. So the first project I wanted to talk about is a stream restoration project that we worked on several years ago. in Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is southeastern Pennsylvania, on a country club, actually called Whitford Country Club. This is a little headwater stream called Colebrook Run, a little first-order tributary, but really causing a lot of havoc for the stream, for the golf course in particular. So they had called us up kind of out of the blue with concerns about repeated damage to the course from erosion and flooding, and kind of this history of Band-Aid solutions. So they, would erode in a particular area, they would put some riprap there, continue to erode, and they wanted really a holistic approach. And so we sat down, met with them. Next slide, please. Teamed up with the local conservation district, and talked about some overarching goals. And this was really also tied to a Growing Greener grant that we were interested in applying for, and ultimately were successful in securing about $400,000 for that grant. But you can see the goals are very multi-objective. Nutrient sediment loading, definitely, we need to do that for our MS4 and Growing Greener grants. Protecting near course assets. We had a clogging irrigation intake as a result of all this sediment that's in play. Improving aquatic habitat, course aesthetics, maintenance facility runoff. So there's a lot of things that we wanted to do with this project. So multi-objective from the start. Next slide. And so the approach was really, I'll just go through a kind of a series of these slides talking about the approach, and you'll see some built project photos. But this was up at the upper end of the course, very high, steep, or very high energy, steeply sloping channel, lots of bank erosion, particular causing coarse material to be put into the stream, and which was being transported downstream into less steeply sloping areas, which is filling in the floodplain and the channels and leading to flooding. We really wanted to get that under control and use kind of a boulder tow and soil lift approach on that one. Next slide. In the middle portions of the course, we excavated a large floodplain. So this was a huge excavation project, really to lower the course by about, or lower the stream by about 4 feet. This is where all the flooding was occurring really on the course. Lowered the stream channel by around 4 feet, built a new floodplain at a lower elevation, and completely rebuilt the channel of the meandering stream using natural channel design principles. And then we're able to actually use the excavated material from this project to build a new driving range for the course, which was a great reuse of material on site. Next slide. So within this is a shot of the built project a couple years after installation. And another thing that we really wanted to do is create buffers. So where possible, buffer the stream with herbaceous vegetation, trees a little lower downstream, but for play areas, we had to kind of keep the trees to a minimum. Provided some nice challenges for golfing, made the adjacent holes a little bit more interesting. I don't know if the golfers would necessarily cheer the high buffers, but this is looking downstream through the middle of the course. So nice, riparian buffers where possible along the stream bank. In the lower areas of the course, we were able to actually completely reroute. Sorry, next slide, Tom. Completely reroute the stream. You can see the sort of pre-existing route of the stream in orange here. And we were able to create a meandering channel that went way out into this old field, got away from the course, which is a great thing for the course. But for the stream, we were able to go through this corridor, which is now completely forested. We planted hundreds of trees in here. The regulators really love this, as well as the Growing Greener funders. It was really a win-win, a big win for the ecology of the stream. We're able to install a lot of woody debris and root wads into this section, things that we couldn't do in the more developed portions of the course. They're really just turning our attention to ecology and allowing the stream to kind of do its thing in this old field was a critical approach. And then layering onto that, next slide, replacing the irrigation intake. That's the new intake there. It was previously clogging. We located in a step pool structure so that it would be sort of nice, clear and clean water within an existing design pool, which is a great improvement. You can see their irrigation pond a little further down. And then redesigning bridges, next slide. There's some fish passage issues associated with the current vehicular bridge, so replaced the previous bridge with a contact modular arch bridge with a bottomless design to promote fish passage, and actually replaced about 7 or 8 cart bridges as well along the way to reduce accelerated flow through the bridge openings, which was creating a lot of bank erosion. And then finally, green infrastructure was a big part of providing, you can see some bioswales that are adjacent to the creek, providing treatment of runoff from their maintenance facility, which is actually located right near the creek, which again was a big draw for funders and provided lots of pollutant load reduction. So the idea is doing a lot of things with the same project. In this particular project, the greatest sort of part about the project was we didn't have to spend, the municipality, West Whiteland Township, didn't spend any money on it. The club actually funded the entire project, minus the Growing Greener grant, which is about $400,000 a project. Total project cost is about $1.2 million. The club actually, through assessments of their membership, paid for about $800,000 of the project. So zero net or gross investment by the municipality to get all these benefits. So I want to move quickly into another case study, and I want to turn over to my colleague Kevin Flynn. This one was in the Wisest Mill run watershed in Philadelphia. This is a project that we did. We've done several projects like this in the Wisest Mill, or in the Wissahickon. But steep headwater tributary feeding the Wissahickon, which has a high flow TMDL for sediment, large impervious drainage area, although the park itself, you can see on the right, flows through a nicely wooded riparian valley. The stream itself flows through a nicely wooded riparian valley in the park. The drainage area is highly impervious, about 200 acres of drainage flowing to this point, and as a result, some very significant bank erosion sediment production in this system that we have to contend with. Next slide. So as with the previous project, we sat down with the Philadelphia Water Department and talked about multi-objectives. Tried to, putting a premium on reducing sediment nutrient loads, but also improving aquatic habitat, protecting and repairing near-stream infrastructure, and preserving the historic culture of the character of the valley, which was significant old walls and other historical remnants within that valley, which are pretty interesting. The next slide. So what's our approach here is really to first and foremost understand geomorphic processes acting on this site. And the first thing you'll realize, this is an aerial photo from the mid-50s, 1950s, showing urbanization already taking place. This is northeastern or northwestern Philly. Urbanization taking place since the 1950s. So these streams have been reacting and responding to urbanization since the 50s. Next slide. And we conceptualize that response using a channel evolution model in which the common response is degradation, widening, reaggradation, and a quasi-equilibrium. And that whole sequence kind of moves from downstream to upstream. And so you have downstream segments that have already gone through that sequence and upstream segments that are pretty raw and still going through a lot of adjustment. Next slide. And so at the upstream end, you have, the downstream or the down cutting kind of runs into an existing stormwater outfall, which is really the head of the channel. And so we have infrastructure damage. We have a lot of active erosion in these upstream segments as well. Next slide. But downstream, we have significant recovery and restabilization into this sort of quasi-fiber channel. And you can see the bar formation here. A lot of that material is actually coming from upstream as the upstream channels in size. And so we're actually seeing pretty good recovery downstream just passively and not a lot of sediment production. Next slide. We wanted to stabilize the stream channel strategically. So most of our active stabilization and restoration work was concentrated. You can see a step pool channel here and then some outfall stabilization work out of the outfall that I just showed. But bringing that, really focusing that active stabilization on the upper portions of the channel, which were still pretty raw, and adjusting in that channel evolution model sort of sequence. Next slide. But we also wanted to try and manage the stormwater upstream. That was one of the BMP criteria, if you remember. So we found this. This is the head of the channel here. The green area is an old field site. It used to be actually a equestrian riding ring. Now kind of going to an old field. And you know, this is an ideal place to manage a lot of stormwater before it gets into the channel. And with this approach, we really want to have a multi-objective approach, even with our stormwater wetland. So looking at detention time for water quality benefits, infiltration volume for base flow, and then excess shear reduction for channel protection. That's a measure of the exceedance of the critical shear stress, which actually is responsible for erosion in stream channel. So I'll get to that on the next slide, how we actually go about looking at that. So this is called a jet test device. And we affix this to the bank, agitate some water, and actually are able to produce a little cone of erosion. That tells us what the critical shear stress is. So the shear stress at which, if you go higher than that, you have erosion. If you're going lower than that, you do not have erosion. So we're able to then use that to, in conjunction with a hydrologic and hydraulic model, to predict the exceedances of that critical shear stress, where we're going to get erosion, and then use our design process to minimize those exceedances. So we can actually design the wetland to specifically reduce erosion in the stream channel along the banks. Next slide. And this is a grading plan showing the full wetland. We have water being diverted from a large stormwater main along Wise's Mill into an upper wetland basin or cell, and being transmitted via pipe flow and swale to a lower, larger wetland cell before being diverted back into Wise's Mill Run. Next slide. And just to show you some of the engineering that goes into these systems, this is a deep custom diversion structure that is underneath Wise's Mill Road that really basically collects that water, diverts it with a baffle into an orifice, and diverts a very specific amount of water that we can handle and we can manage into the wetland system, and lets the rest of the water kind of continue going down on its way to the stream via the existing route. Next slide. So this is the project at installation. Here you can see the upper pool graded out and feeding into the lower pool in the distance with Wise's Mill Road running along the border of the project there in the kind of in the middle of the screen. Next slide. And the project a few years after installation. It's actually not that far from my house. I kind of get over the hike with my kids over here, and this is a great natural area. You know, you would never think this is doing anything particularly impressive as far as an infrastructure function, but it is. There's a lot of engineering behind it. But to the general public, and even to me when I'm just out there, it just seems like a nice place to be. And I think that's a really important part of our design strategy, is creating places that people like to go and recreate. Next slide. So the final piece of this project I want to talk about is just the infrastructure protection and repair aspect. And there was a lot of these little sort of, I shouldn't call them little, but spot repairs to infrastructure that we kind of layered onto this project. This is a culvert, a twin bore culvert coming under Summit Avenue, one of the tributaries. This is sort of mid-construction, rebuilding severely eroded wing walls and tying those into existing stormwater outfalls. Next slide. And you can see a little bit further along construction, lots of hard engineering, structural engineering here, figuring out how to do these custom wing walls. These are all cast in place structures, but integral to the project in terms of delivering an overall value to the city and sort of stressing the multi-objective approach. So with that, I think I might be done. I am done. I'm going to pass that on to Kevin, and he's going to talk about some of our work in Chester, Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Shandor. I'll just move quickly through another example or two here. So I mean, one of the keys to being able to do these multi-objective projects, it's finding great sites to do the projects that allow you to achieve all those objectives. This site we're going to talk about is Veterans Memorial Park, which is located in Chester, Pennsylvania. So the park here, it's in the image. It's on the lower left side of that image there. So there's a lot of active recreational space in this park that's very well used. But then there's this 5-acre space on the southern end of the park that's highlighted in red there on the slide. It's completely underused, and that's primarily because of flooding. So the major cause for this flooding is a buried stream under the park. So that stream, which is now contained in a 6-foot diameter storm sewer, has a drainage area of over 200 impervious acres that drains through this park. So, and then in the park, that 6-foot diameter pipe actually necks down to a 36-inch pipe before it crosses the Amtrak right-of-way, which is shown in the bottom left corner of that slide, or in the image. And the downstream infrastructure is significantly undersized as well. So major conveyance issues as a major cause of the flooding in the park, in the surrounding area. So, and not only is this causing frequent flooding in the park, but major flooding issues downstream. So water essentially short circuits and floods down Ingle Street, which Tom, you can highlight with your pointer there, to the east, and then it just flows. It overtops the road, flows right down the street and into the neighborhood streets as well that are downstream off the slide. So in connecting with the community during the planning of the project, there's great interest, obviously, not just in addressing the flooding issues, which are obvious in creating a number of challenges for the neighborhood, but also taking back that large area of the park for recreation. I mean, there was specific interest for creating a more natural area for the community, and also to create a place for fishing in the park here. With all these factors in mind, we really established 4 primary goals for this project: flood mitigation, to create natural habitats in the park, water quality treatment of stormwater in the MS4 system, and then also to create new recreational opportunities, but also to improve the existing recreation in the park. Next slide, Tom. All right, so on the screen, so this is the concept that was developed in conjunction with the community, and it's a large wetland complex that's proposed in that area on the southern end of the park. So the design approach, it was really directed by these 4 things on the slide. The first, create as much storage as possible. The flooding issues are so significant here. Really, every gallon of storage that we can create is going to have an impact downstream and upstream as well in the park. Maximize the water quality treatment through detention time and filtration through the system. So as much pollutant removal from the MS4 as possible. Create these natural habitats that I mentioned. So there's a very high groundwater table in the park. So that can be looked at as a constraint, but here we're looking at it as an opportunity to have a sustainable perennial wetland, even through very dry conditions. And then the last, provide fishing opportunities. So the proposed basin is going to create over 2 acres of open water in the park, and then we're able to integrate access to that open water through a fishing bridge, as well as a trail that goes around the entire pond, providing access to the water. Able to additionally incorporate a gazebo and community gathering space as well. And then also to be able to fit all this in a space that does not impact those existing active uses I mentioned in the park, the ball fields in particular, which are to the north of the system. Next slide, please. So this graph it's looking at the peak flow mitigation performance. I won't get into too many details, just to say that there's really significant reductions are all the way up through the 25-year storm event. And then right now we're looking at the potential for active controls to provide further mitigation for those larger, more extreme storms, as well as potential future changes to rainfall patterns in the future. Next slide. Next slide, please, Tom. Thanks.
Cool. Can you see it?
Yep. So just to help to visualize the flooding impact, this is the inundation map for the 10-year storm event. In the existing conditions on the left, so you can see the park is flooding, including the ball fields, and then to the east there, that's Ingle Street. So you have floodwaters, as I mentioned, overtopping Ingle Street, running down the street, and then causing some significant impacts to the neighborhood below. So on the right there, so in the project, with the projects in place, we're proposing to eliminate that street flooding for that 10-year event, up to that 10-year event, as well as significantly improving the flooding in the park, and protecting those active recreational resources that are well used, that I mentioned. Next slide. This is just a quick look at the 2-year storm event. So in that 2-year event, we're looking to eliminate flooding within the park completely, contain those higher flows within the wetland complex. All right, next slide. Just really quickly here, this is another park project that's very similar in many ways to the Veterans Memorial Park. Just to reinforce the point that really finding the right sites is critical to meeting these multi-objective criteria that we're setting for some of these projects. So this is Wissahickon Park in Lansdale Borough. Again, it was very underused because of flooding issues, significant stream bank erosion through the park, with little to no stream buffers throughout the park. And then there are actually 3 MS4 outfalls in the park. So this project, which was actually completed about 10 years ago, created infiltration basins at all those outfalls, stabilized the stream banks, as well as created buffers, stream buffers within the park. So here, this project not only able to essentially reinvigorate this park, but this project was able to meet all of the borough's TMDL and pollutant reduction plan requirements for the Wissahickon Creek watershed in one single project. So and this project is it's being credited at nearly 130 pounds of sediment removal per year for their TMDL and their MS4 permit compliance. So as I mentioned, the project was completed about 10 years ago, and really the response of the stream corridor in the park itself has just been incredible in this time period. And the annual operation cost is very minimal as well for the park. So the basins themselves are maintained by public works staff, and we're assisting the borough with performing ongoing monitoring of stream stability, as well as the performance in the infiltration basins. And as Chandra mentioned before, I mean, there's even potential, the borough doesn't need it specifically for their permit, but through that monitoring, there's even potential to demonstrate additional sediment removal credit through the monitoring work that's being done. And I just want to mention, so we did not design this project, AKRF, but we worked with DEP on the crediting that has just been approved for the current MS4 permit cycle, and we're performing that long-term inspection and monitoring for the project. So just a couple minutes left. I'm going to turn it back to Tom to wrap us up. Hopefully we'll have some time for discussion as well and questions.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think just that, I hope this gave a flavor for what we were talking about with multi-objectives and co-benefits. You know, this is really the root of our firm, is environmental projects and making sure that we're working in our communities. We want to make our communities a better place to live, right? And our focus has always been on environmental assessment and analysis, and designing around that, with an environmental planning core. And we go anywhere. We'll go in urban systems and rural settings, like we've shown in our case studies. So with that, I'd just like to thank everyone, and just, again, thank the SPC, thank everyone's time and attention. I know it's a summer Thursday, and people are probably itching for the weekend. But with that, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. You can also follow up with us, any of us, with the email address here. I'm in Pittsburgh, so I know some of you, so I'm sure some of you have my email already. But please reach out, or if you have any questions now, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Should we do some virtual clapping for Tom?
Okay. I'll clap for you guys too, Hey, Emily, how's it going? She asks, are you using hydro-connected elevation models to help create the flooding maps shown in these project areas? So that would be, I'm assuming you're talking about the Chester project, right? And the flood inundation maps, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could be. Yeah, we're just, well, I'll throw that to Kevin, but let me know. I can chime in as well, later.
Sure. No, for that project in particular, we're manually mapping the different flood elevations from our model results. So it's not dynamically connected to the GIS model.
It's a pretty complicated situation with they actually have this giant stormwater vault that the underground stream flows into, and then there's been there's an orifice that controls flow across the Amtrak bridge, and that's been plated, and so it's a very complicated orifice structure to model. It's like 7 different individual openings. We actually have to measure individually, trying to get a sense of what this thing is doing, and so it's a custom model at a fairly small scale. So everything was done in CAD in terms of mapping it onto our existing topographic survey. But thank you, Emily, for the question.
I guess we're at 1 o'clock here, so looks like we don't have any further questions. So I think we'll wrap up. We can send slides to. I'll touch base with Aaron and see what the protocols are on that. But I'm sure you might be able to find them later on the website. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day, and talk to everyone soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.